Good day, guys. Here we are again in another episode of health and safety topic. So, the topic that we are going to feature today is what we call confined space. So, since one of the viewer has raised this topic to be discussed. However, again, I would like to focus on the real or the brief description of what is a confined space, what are its hazards, and as a health and safety professional, what we need to do against these hazards or what we need to prepare against this hazard. So first of all, let's define what is a confined space. So if you look into the definition, there are three criteria that needs to be met in order for a space to be considered a confined space. So the first criteria is that that space can accommodate or would allow workers to work on that space. So that's the first criteria. The second criteria of a confined space is a limited or a restricted or has a limited or restricted entry and exit point. And the last criteria for it to be called a confined space is that it is not designed for continuous human occupancy. Okay, so by definition, a confined space is a space that would allow workers to work on, but it has a restricted or limited entry and exit, and at the same time, it's not designed for continuous human occupancy. So that's the definition. So by the definition itself, we can immediately recognize that there are potential hazards or risks associated with it. So one thing that you need to consider as a health and safety professional is to look into the space that you are checking in. What is that space used for? Okay. For example, if it's a tank, what is the content of the tank for? Or if it's a sewer, what was the content of the sewer that's passing through it? Or if it's an excavation, what is the condition of the area that is being excavated? So in this way, you would immediately identify the hazards associated with it. So the most common hazards in confined space is what we call the atmospheric hazards. Okay, so these are hazards that is present or can be present in a confined space. Okay, so it can be asphyxiation hazard. It can be oxygen deficient hazard or oxygen enriched hazard, or it can be a poisonous gas like a carbon monoxide gas, or it can be a chemical that is toxic or that is hazardous, that is corrosive, that when people get exposed to it would end to injuring themselves. So those are the considerations. What else? Of course, when you work in a confined space, it's almost immediately a fact that most of the confined spaces are dark and has poor illumination. And since it's restricted, there can also be poor ventilation. So that leads to the conditions that we have discussed earlier. So apart from that, when people work inside, then they are making some kind of activities inside. Of course, the noise is being amplified inside the confined space, so you have that noise hazard. If you are working in a day, a midday, or during summertime, of course, the condition in a confined space is more difficult. It creates a humid or hot atmosphere inside the confined space, leading to what we call the heat stress. Okay, so those are some of the factors, and of course, if it's dark, so we provide illumination. So when we provide illumination, we have to take good care of the cable arrangement, because if we are not taking care of that, then it leads to a slip or tripping hazard. Of course, there are also confined spaces that are mechanically configured. Okay, it's not a simple kind of space, so it has some sort of curves or partitions. So these are kind of hazards that you need also to address. Actually, there are so many hazards that you can find in a confined space. So those are just examples, and you can still identify more that I was not able to mention. But out of these hazards that we mentioned, the most common control that we normally consider or always consider as health and safety professionals is to always check the condition of the confined space, and that is to understand what's the atmospheric condition of the confined space. That's the reason why we need to conduct gas testing. Okay, the most common gases that is measured in a gas meter is oxygen. Okay, the level of oxygen. Some gas meters is a multi-gas meter, so it measures different kind of gases. It can be an LEL, a lower explosive limit. It can be carbon monoxide, H2S, or hydrogen sulfide. So it depends on the type of gas meter that you have. Obviously, there's only one thing that would lead us to conclude on this kind of control that we are implementing, or I mean testing that we are implementing, is that we need to ventilate the area. Okay, so the ventilation would provide the necessary oxygen level that is required in a confined space. So you ventilate the area, so that's one way of introducing oxygen, and that's also another way of removing toxic gases that's inside the confined space. Now, there are so many ways of removing toxic gases, but I will not discuss it here. But the objective of ventilating the space is to ensure that there is enough oxygen inside the confined space. Okay, so confined space is a very big topic to discuss in health and safety, but that's the information that I can get to share with you now. Okay, by the way, I think that there's one thing also that you need to think of about confined spaces is the type of people that will be working inside the confined space. So there are only three types, or three types of workers. Okay, the first worker is the entrant. So from the word entrant, so these are the workers that goes inside the confined space to perform the activities. And there's another type of worker that is involved in a confined space activity, and this is the attendant, or other call them as a standby person. And obviously from the word standby person or attendant, this is the person that stays outside of the confined space to monitor the in and out of the workers. So that's just the basic or main function. But there are other functions related to this person. You can search on that. And last but not the least is, of course, the supervisor. He's the overall in charge of the work activity. And all these three personnel, or three types of personnel or workers, they need to understand their roles, their responsibilities when they are working inside confined space. So I hope that with this brief video discussion that you get to learn something about confined space. So thank you for listening, and hope you will raise another topic that you would want me to cover. Brief discussion about health and safety topics. So hope you like the video and hope you share. So thank you for listening and have a good day.